I'd like to welcome everybody to the next installment of our speaker series. We've been doing this now for many years, since the advent of COVID. Something good that came out of the pandemic. But tonight we have a real treat. I met Ruby. I'm on the board of the Arroyos Foothills Conservancy, which is a wonderful organization that is interested in establishing land trusts for to sort of make contiguous wildlife corridors. And I had met Ruby at this, sorry, I'm just trying to let people in here, nonprofit, and I'm actually now on the board, so it's really lovely. And she gave a spectacular presentation, so my little brain was going, I can just file her away someplace. But more interestingly, Ruby and I had a nice coffee, and she's just a wonderful person. She is a graduate of Occidental College, esteemed research institute, and has a huge interest in biology. And as I mentioned, she is the research leader of the Arroyos Foothills Conservancy Land Trust and Habitat for Wildlife Corridors. She runs their camera program, which contributes to an international database. And so this is information coming out of Southern California, but it sort of looks at some of the global aspects of things. And when she was at Oxy, she did some research on tropical insects and their fungal and bacterial endosymbionts, something I sort of have a lot of interest in, the microbiomes of all kinds of living creatures. She's an avid long distance runner and spends her time exploring Southern California. I think she's originally from Washington, right, Ruby? Isn't that where you're from?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I have to say that she obviously has some kind of power, because 3 days ago, we had a mountain lion in downtown Pasadena. Now, I don't think it had a placard on that said, please attend Ruby's lecture on the Phil Simon Clinic Tanzania project, but it was taking a nap by an apartment building. But this was not up near the foothills. This was way into the city. So it was very timely. And Ruby's going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons and perils that some of the wildlife have to and sort of go through to get around. We all know about P22, of course, the very famous mountain lion, and of course now the Annenberg Wildlife Corridor bridge that's still in process, but is going to be opening pretty soon. So a very expensive but worthwhile project that is spanning the 101. So it is my distinct pleasure to bring you Ruby Siehl, and we will let her take off from here.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kim. That was really, really kind. Hi, everyone. My name is Ruby Siehl. I am going to share my screen now so I can show you all the presentation I have prepared. Okay, I think it is officially shared. My name is Ruby, like I mentioned. I work for the Arroyos and Foothills Conservancy, like Kim mentioned. And my position at the Conservancy is Urban Wildlife Research Leader. So that essentially just means I am the person on staff who coordinates everything that we do with using wildlife cameras, or camera traps, as some people call them, to support our mission of building wildlife corridors in the really highly urbanized area of Los Angeles. And we do this by conducting and contributing to urban wildlife research. And this also informs our goal of acquiring land to save it as habitat. So I'm super happy to be here and excited to share everything with you all. I think I know that Kim touched on this when she was introducing me, but I just wanted to touch on my background a little bit as a biologist, because this is the experience that kind of got me to where I am today. So when I was an undergraduate student, like Kim said, I attended Occidental College in Los Angeles. And when I was there, I worked under the mentorship of Dr. Shauna Gofretti, who is an amazing microbiologist. And when I was a student there, we were studying these insects that were living in Costa Rica in the tropics. And these insects, which are plant hopper insects, mainly eat plant sap as their main source of food. And that would be akin to humans only eating carbohydrates as their main source of food. So their diet is very, on its own, nutritionally deficient. So what we were studying was how they have microbial symbionts living inside of them, and they're in this mutually beneficial relationship with either bacteria or fungi or sometimes both. And another interesting thing that we discovered was that some of these insects had some fungi living inside of them, as you can see with these red cells pictured in this microscopy image here. These insects had fungal cells living inside of them that were related to some parasitic fungi that infect other animals with a lethal effect. So, if anybody has ever seen the TV show The Last of Us, which is about these this zombie fungus or this fungus that causes people to turn into zombies, that fungus depicted in the show is in theory in the same genus as the fungus that's actually providing a nutritional benefit to these insects. So all of that's to say that this is the project that really got me hooked on studying our ecosystems and the environment in general, and really pushed me in the direction of becoming an ecologist. And I had the opportunity and privilege of doing a ton of other amazing field work and contributing to some other really amazing research when I was there that, again, just really bolstered my interest in the world of ecology and ecosystems. But when I was finishing up my undergraduate years, I stumbled across this field called urban ecology. And so this is, as you might be able to guess from the name, it's the study of ecosystems in urban areas. And so when I was in my very last semester of college, I really got to dive into some research that was examining how the presence of humans in urban areas changes the dynamics between predator and prey species. And that really started to fascinate me with this idea of ecology or ecological concepts in urban areas being really different from ecological concepts in more natural areas. And so I really started developing an interest for studying ecosystems in or adjacent to urban areas, and particularly mammal behavior as well. So that's kind of what led me to working for the Arroyos and Foothills Conservancy, or AFC, as I might refer to it later in this presentation. And so, since working for the Conservancy, I've had the privilege of doing a ton of really fun field work. So, this is an image of me setting up a video trail camera at our Rubio Canyon Preserve, which is in Altadena. And this photo was taken, I want to say maybe 3 months after the Eaton fire moved through this area. So this is the landscape kind of in its first stages of recovery post-fire. But yeah, since I've been working with the Conservancy, I've had the privilege of presenting research on the Conservancy's behalf and spending a lot of time outside in Southern California and Los Angeles ecosystems, which has been really, really amazing and such a valuable experience. So just to kind of introduce what the organization that I work for does, our overall mission, simply put, is to save habitat for wildlife. But we really specifically focus on building wildlife corridors between different patches of habitat in the greater Los Angeles area. So I'll show you a map of that and of the area that we work in a second. But essentially, our overarching goal is to restore biodiversity throughout the Los Angeles region because we have so much biodiversity here. But a lot of other land trusts, particularly those in less developed areas or in more rural areas, they focus a lot of the time on acquiring as much land as possible and stewarding it and, promoting the use of that habitat for wildlife and humans alike. But what makes us as an urban land trust a little bit different is that we, like I said, are focusing really specifically on building wildlife corridors between patches of habitat that are surrounded by urban development. And this is really important for the populations of wildlife living in Los Angeles because when we connect habitat islands, we allow wildlife to find mates and therefore secure genetic diversity within their own populations and allow those populations to stay resilient over time. They do this by leaving to establish their own territory or migrating if necessary. Also, establishing and building wildlife corridors helps ecosystems become more resilient in the face of climate change because animals can move and access food sources in different places and access water. Also, they can potentially escape climate change-induced extreme weather events like wildfires, which are especially relevant here in Southern California. And then they can also, maintain predator-prey dynamic equilibrium by evading predators or moving throughout the ecosystem like they might normally need to. And then again, particularly relevant everywhere, but especially in Southern California, is that by building wildlife corridors and allowing wildlife to move through more natural areas, we can promote wildlife and human safety by preventing vehicle wildlife collisions as well. So this is a map of what we refer to as our long-term conservation area. So kind of just south of the bottom of this map is downtown Los Angeles, and kind of at the bottom here is Northeast Los Angeles and Glendale, and here's Pasadena and Altadena over here to the east. And the main kind of patches of habitat or areas of habitat that we work in are the San Gabriel Mountains to the north, the Verdugo Mountains, which is kind of this large island of habitat, and then the San Rafael Hills, which are north of Northeast LA. That's another really distinct island of habitat. And our goal is to connect these islands of habitat and promote habitat connectivity. And this is kind of our yellow brick road vision of what we want to see in an ideal world in terms of connectivity as well. So allowing wildlife and wildlife populations to be able to move through not only just these areas of habitat as necessary, but also down the Arroyo Seco into Northeast Los Angeles, and then over to Griffith Park and the Santa Monica Mountains as well. So really keeping that long-term goal in mind is kind of how we operate. And since we were founded in 2000, we have contributed to saving over 105 acres across 6 different communities in the areas that we work in, which when you look at this map and you look at the orange polygons on this map, which represent different preserves that we have saved, it might look small in the grand scheme of things, but just know that all of those preserves were pursued and acquired with very specific strategic decisions in mind about, what habitat is the best to save in terms of promoting the most habitat connectivity possible. So all of those parcels were pursued very strategically. And then, of course, there's also the challenge of, coming up with the money to afford to buy land in such an expensive place like Los Angeles. So as an organization, we do a lot of different things, and all of my fellow staff members could talk for a very long time about everything that they do for the organization. But mainly our main goal is to buy and connect land, as I've been mentioning. But what I'm going to talk about is how we conduct and contribute to urban wildlife research. But I also just want to mention that we do a lot of native habitat restoration and stewardship of the land that we preserve. We also have a really robust education program and provide free field trips to grades K through 12 with different curriculum. And then we also advocate for wildlife and policy as well. And I should also mention that we have a summer internship program for both college and high school students as well. But this evening, I'm going to be talking mainly about our urban wildlife research program. So as an organization, we say that our conservation work is driven by data, but what does that actually look like? So the main component of this data-driven conservation work is our camera research and using wildlife cameras to conduct research and understand how wildlife are existing and moving throughout our study area. But we also conduct connectivity modeling as well. So we have an advisor that creates these models that essentially predict where wildlife are most likely to be traveling throughout the landscape. And then we also conduct different biological studies as needed, and that includes habitat surveys when there might be a piece of land that we're interested in saving from development. And then we also rely a lot on community reports as well, which I think makes us really unique as an organization, that we rely a lot on community engagement and people just letting us know where they see wildlife moving throughout the areas that they live in. And so our first cameras that we used kind of as a tool for supporting our conservation work were placed in 2013 at the property that would later become our Cottonwood Canyon Preserve, which is in Pasadena, just kind of northwest of the Rose Bowl Stadium. And these two cameras that were placed not only supported our acquisition of the preserve and our relationship building with the landowners there, but also supported some field trip programming that was happening at the preserve as well. So really supporting our acquisition and education work from the beginning. And this was the video that really sparked an interest in our staff at the time because this fawn, who's probably just a few days old, really showed the organization that, in this habitat that's surrounded by busy roads and houses and other development, animals could feel safe having their young in this habitat and in this preserve. So this video is really what sparked our director of operations interest at the time and encouraged the organization to keep using wildlife cameras as a tool for conservation work. And so I'm mostly going to be talking about mammals in this presentation, particularly because they are highly impacted by habitat connectivity. And cameras are a really great tool for studying mammals because they tend to be very elusive and they tend to be very human avoidant. So we can really start to understand the impact of our conservation work by monitoring them with these cameras as tools. And also a lot of camera traps or wildlife cameras are really best at detecting mammals specifically. So biologists who study birds or amphibians tend to use other methods for surveying those species. And so just to kind of talk about our wildlife camera program and team a little bit more, we have expanded over time. So like I mentioned, we started using cameras in 2013, but in 2015, our program expanded a little bit when we started partnering with two amazing wildlife photographers, Denny Calais and Joanna Turner. If you've ever seen a picture, a really nice high resolution picture of a coyote or a mountain lion at night up in the hills with the cityscape and lights of Los Angeles down in the background, there's a pretty good chance that one of these photographers took that photo. So they're really amazing and have really supported our work. And then in 2018, we grew our camera program and team even more by starting a partnership with Dr. Amanda Zelmer, who is a professor of biology at Occidental College. And I'll talk a little bit more about the project that we partnered with her on and continue to work with her on. So right now we have about 35 different camera sites in our long-term conservation area that I would consider active, and about 10 different volunteers that help us manage those cameras, and they're a really valuable part of our team. But over time, we've had many more camera sites and different volunteers come through the team as well that have helped us out. So it's really amazing. And so these are some undergraduate students that have helped out with our work as well. And these are other volunteers. And then these are just a couple amazing photos that we've captured on some of our cameras, including this friendly looking bear in an Altadena backyard as well. And this is just a little animation that I put together of how the number of places that we've collected camera data at has increased over time. So not all of these sites currently have a camera at them, but I think this is just a great representation of how we've collected so much data over time since we really started to grow our camera program. So I want to talk a little bit about the different ways that we use cameras specifically. So one way that we use cameras as an organization to collect information and data on what we're doing is by just placing wildlife cameras at the preserves that we've already acquired and that we're actively stewarding. So this is a little coyote stretching at our Sycamore Canyon Preserve, which is in Glendale. So we have 6 different preserves throughout our long-term conservation area, a couple in Altadena, one in La Crescenta up here, one in Pasadena, our Cottonwood Canyon Preserve. Here's the Rose Bowl Stadium down here. And then we have our Sycamore Canyon Preserve, which is in this habitat island of the San Rafael Hills in Glendale. And then we have our Sunshine Preserve, which is at the edge of the Verdugo Mountains, also in Glendale, but on the other side of the freeway. But I'm going to be sharing a specific example from our Rubio Canyon Preserve, which is in Altadena. This is our biggest preserve, which is 41 acres, and we preserved this habitat in 2009. So we've been stewarding it for quite a while. But unfortunately, this preserve was burned in the Eaton fire in January of 2025, so about a year and a half ago. And this is what it looked like before on the left, before the fire. So very lush, very shrub, scrubby, chaparral habitat, really beautiful. And this was the canyon, that same area, about a month after the Eaton fire. So really devastating for the landscape on this part of the preserve, and really just changed the landscape and habitat very drastically there. So we had a camera that survived that fire remarkably. And because we had that camera placed before and after the fire, we were really able to see how much the landscape had changed. And we were able to see how wildlife may have been a little bit impacted by this fire as well. Or we got a glimpse into that, at least. Wildlife were highly impacted. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to go through this and demonstrate how using cameras as a tool for monitoring our preserves and understanding how the landscape is changing has been really valuable for us. So this is a photo of this bobcat here hanging out in the bottom of the canyon at in the afternoon of the day that the fire started. And so at around midnight that night, we don't see any fire yet, but here's a kind of the shadow of a deer right here. And so it's 12:21 a.m. in this photo. And just 7 minutes after that last photo, we see a deer starting to run away from something. And then 4 minutes later, we see the first ember fly in front of the camera. And then pretty quickly, we saw just how quickly the fire moved through the bottom of the canyon. We see another deer running through, so we were able to gain some insight into how wildlife were affected actually during the progression of the fire. And again, just really remarkable to see how quickly it moved through. It was very devastating. And, even just over the course of 20 minutes, the fire moved through so quickly. And then just even less than 5 hours later, it really quieted down. And that was just really remarkable for us to see and kind of gain some insight as to the dynamic of the fire moving through this particular preserve. But luckily, the preserve has recovered really, really well since the fire, and we've been able to understand that from using wildlife cameras. So this is about a month after the fire, and we have this hawk hanging out on the ground. Um, but interestingly, also, it rained about a month and a half after the fire, and this camera is in the exact same spot as this photo. So because we had cameras up this whole time, we were able to see how much the bottom of the canyon and the landscape changed and how dynamic the landscape was as sediment flowed through the area. And again, these photos were taken from the exact same vantage point. So we were really able to see sediment move in. And then also we were able to see sensitive species like this gray fox and this western gray squirrel return to the preserve, which was really amazing and valuable knowledge for us as well. There's this western gray squirrel hanging out, native squirrel. And then also Rubio is a really great example of how we can also use wildlife camera footage to support our communications with our supporters and our network. So here we have this black bear moving through the canyon, and it's always really engaging to be able to share videos from our preserves and let our community members know that their support is helping us steward the land and helping wildlife use habitat in these urban areas or areas that are recovering from fire. There's a mountain lion in the canyon about a few months after the fire as well. So this is just a really important aspect of the community engagement too. Great, another great thought. So just very helpful for sharing the community and encouraging people to get involved with us. So another story that I want to tell in terms of how we use wildlife cameras to support our mission is, as I kind of mentioned, how we use them to support our goal of acquiring land to save it for habitat. So we use cameras to support our land acquisition efforts because they, give us information about the species on different pieces of habitat that contribute information to biological reports and therefore kind of bolster our requests for funding. But what I think is really important as well is how wildlife cameras they're a powerful tool, like I was saying, in terms of engagement. And therefore, they're a really important tool for building relationships with landowners because the properties that we are pursuing for acquisition are often at risk of being developed and for the landscape to be completely changed for a single home or something like that. So it's a really valuable way of encouraging landowners to consider conserving their property for habitat. So this is an area where one of our preserves is, our Sycamore Canyon Preserve. This is in that island of habitat called the San Rafael Hills. And this orange line represents a pretty busy arterial road called Chevy Chase Drive, and the yellow lines represent either known or hypothesized wildlife routes crossing that road. And the dark green blocks are pieces of land that our organization owns. So we've been working in this area a lot. And we're also pursuing a couple of other properties surrounding our existing preserve for acquisition. So one of these properties we'll call Property Group 1 here in red. And I placed a couple of cameras on that property and started talking to the landowners about where they were seeing wildlife and started picking up some wildlife activity like these coyotes and bobcats and deer on the cameras and starting to share that information with them. And they would tell me about the wildlife that they had seen. And similarly, kind of on the north side of our preserve, there's a property group that we'll call Property Group 2. So a few different parcels clustered together, where just like Property Group 1, I had placed a couple of wildlife cameras and started to pick up deer, coyotes, striped skunk, western gray squirrel, all of these animals using that property as well. And that was giving us some insight into the value of that habitat. And so the point that I want to make with this is that by sharing photos and videos that we take with property owners, that encourages them to share their own information about the wildlife that they're seeing with us. And it really helps start to build a collaborative relationship around the conservation of this habitat. So there was one day that I got an email from the owners of Property Group 1, and they had sent me this video that they were really excited about. That was a home security camera of this bear walking up their driveway. And because I knew that I had a camera placed on the other group of properties, I thought, okay, I'll check the camera at Property Group 2 and see if this bear shows up. And sure enough, just I think it was about 12 minutes later, the bear had walked to Property Group 2, and I could tell from that bear had likely taken this route, represented by this little bear icon here. And that was a really fulfilling moment for me, I think, because it showed us that, our work saving this preserve, our Sycamore Canyon Preserve, it was worthwhile work because wildlife were able to move from this area by the road further into this undeveloped habitat and kind of along this route here. So this really just showed us that the work that we were doing and continue to do was of value to wildlife, particularly larger species like bears. And I just kind of included this to demonstrate how we actively examine or pursue other properties in the area as well. So these are all kind of undeveloped parcels. And so we tend to rank the different parcels in an area based on if we're targeting them or if we are interested in pursuing them or if others have conserved them in some way. So I just wanted to show this example as well and how we considered the paths that wildlife take through areas that have a lot of development, which are denoted by these yellow lines here. And finally, kind of our biggest aspect of how we conduct urban wildlife research is what I'm really excited to talk about because I love this network. Our main long-term camera research project is our membership in the Urban Wildlife Information Network. And so this is an international network of researchers and urban ecologists that was founded at the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago. And the reason why it was founded is because, urban ecology is kind of a growing field, particularly because the number of people that are expected to live in urban areas and urban areas in general are expected to grow significantly in the next several decades. So urban areas are only going to continue to encroach upon natural areas. So scientists knew that they needed some sort of standard way to start collecting data on animals in urban areas, and they wanted to be able to share that data really easily with one another. And on top of that, because there's so much change that's expected to happen over time, scientists also really wanted to collect data on a long-term time frame as well. So the goal of this international network is to essentially study how urbanization affects species behavior and ecology in general, and how species behavior and ecology might differ from city to city. So some of the methods of this network include sampling and collecting data from wildlife cameras along an urban to rural gradient. So everybody that belongs to this network sets up a transect of cameras in some urban areas, some more suburban areas, and then in some more rural or natural areas. Because in Southern California, there's less of a gradient compared to other cities. So sometimes we refer to our more rural sites as more natural sites. And ideally, in your transect, if you belong to this network, you should also be collecting data at a diversity of habitat types, which kind of depends on the city that you're in. And then also different cameras tend to be placed about 1,000 meters apart within the same city. And a really important part of everybody belonging to this network and collecting data that can be shared from city to city is that cameras have to be placed for the same 4 months every year. So everybody in the network sets up their cameras for the full months of January, April, July, and October to represent the 4 different seasons of the year. And then also when scientists belong to this network, they have to agree to collaborate with others and share their data for multi-city analysis studies. And the reason why everybody follows these standardized protocols so strictly is because it allows people to kind of piece apart the different factors and features of different cities that might be accounting for different ecological dynamics happening in those cities. So, maybe there is something about Seattle that is creating some sort of different ecological dynamic when compared to Chicago and Wilmington, Delaware. And so I included this figure as well to show how differently scientists in these cities are setting up their camera traps, depending on even just the landscape and layout of each city as well. So it's a really interesting way to understand different features of different cities and their impact on ecosystems. So the Arroyos and Foothills Conservancy contributes to this network through what we call our Pasadena transect, because we're technically based in Pasadena, even though our transect stretches into different areas. Like I mentioned, we started our membership in this network through our collaboration that started in 2018 with Professor Amanda Zelmer at Occidental College. And we set up this transect of cameras following our organization's long-term conservation area. So we followed the natural features of this area, and we often refer to this as our Hahamunga to Tahunga wildlife corridor, with Tahunga up here and then Hahamunga watershed over here, and it stretches down into Northeast Los Angeles with Dodger Stadium and downtown LA at the bottom of this map. And so sometimes the question comes up of, why as a small local organization do we participate in such a large, broad network? And why do we, continue to commit to, following these protocols so closely? And the answer to that is that collecting this data has allowed us to make evidence-based decisions within our long-term conservation area. So by sampling and collecting data on, wildlife presence along an urban to natural gradient, that helps us understand where there is good habitat for wildlife and where there's bad habitat for wildlife. And that really helps us obtain this baseline of what habitat wildlife relationships look like in our conservation area. And then that serves as a basis for comparison for our cameras that we place to study wildlife at parcels that we might be interested in acquiring for conservation. And kind of on a similar note, the data that we collect with or through this network tells us what species are associated with different habitat types and features, which can inform our stewardship practices and how we manage our land. Um, on top of all of that, it also just connects us to this amazing network of urban ecologists. So, because we can collaborate with others in terms of developing protocols and managing our data, that really helps strengthen our own research and decision making. And we connect with other groups to participate in, broader urban ecology research. On top of that, it also just helps us promote our visibility and our credibility as an organization. And then what I think is really important is that by following these protocols, we've been able to collect high quality long-term data, which is going to continue to be really valuable for us as a conservation organization. And so I just want to show a few different figures that we've been able to produce so far with this data that we've collected over time. So on the x-axis here, we have the number of photos taken by or of different species. And on the y-axis, we have all of these different species that we've seen on our cameras. So the different colors represent different taxonomic groups, and the blue represents mammals. So as you can see, wildlife cameras are really best suited for taking photos of mammals. And on the very bottom, the animal that we've taken the most pictures of over time are rabbits that we cannot determine what the exact species is. And then after that is coyotes, which is probably not a surprise to many of you. But it's been really amazing to see how many different species we've been able to detect while we've been participating in this study. Another thing that we can do is compare different spots where we've placed cameras throughout our conservation area and start to ask questions about what is it that makes this specific spot more suitable for these species compared to other sites. So on the left here, we have a similar plot where the x-axis represents the number of photos of a certain species at that camera site. And then on the left is all the different species we've detected. And on the left is the camera data from a camera on the Brookside Golf Course, also in Pasadena by the Rose Bowl Stadium. And there we mostly see coyotes because it's very developed compared to some of our other sites. And on the right-hand side, we have a plot from a camera that was placed up in Altadena in a really beautiful area where there's some houses and there's some roads, but there's really a wide open area of natural habitat. And at that camera site, we see a lot of mule deer, which are really avoidant of humans, and other urban and human avoidant species like bobcats and gray foxes and even mountain lions as well. So that's really been able to help us start to piece apart where certain species like to hang out and where others are less inclined to be. This is another really valuable thing that we've been able to do with this data as well. So we can start to understand where different species have been able to move within our long-term conservation area. So both of these maps, it's hard to see the landscape because it's just lines on a plot, but the gray lines represent different freeways around Los Angeles. And you can think of all of the white space in between as being the areas of habitat in between. So for example, on the left, we have gray foxes. And for some reason, after analyzing our data, we found that we've never seen a gray fox in the San Rafael Hills, which is kind of this empty triangle of habitat right here. And then on the other hand, we have a similarly sized carnivore, the bobcat, that has been detected in all of these different areas. And so because we are able to visualize this species presence data, oh, and I should mention that all of the dots on the maps are different places where we've had cameras, but then all of the blue boxes are places where that animal has actually been detected. Um, so yeah, we can start to hypothesize what is it about the habitat and habitat connectivity in these areas that allows bobcats to be able to move throughout these areas that have freeways running through them as compared to gray foxes, which seem to be a little bit less present and maybe more avoidant of these busy areas. And then another thing I mentioned earlier was using all of the data that we've collected over time as kind of a baseline understanding that we can compare properties that we're interested in saving against. So here on the x-axis, we have impervious cover, which is a proxy for just urbanization in general. And then on the y-axis, we have the number of species that were detected on different cameras. And all of the black dots represent different places that we've set up a camera. And so from this network, we've been able to determine that this is the relationship between urbanization and species within our region. So as urbanization increases, we expect to see fewer species in those areas. So if we know that this is our baseline habitat species relationship, just say we are interested in placing a camera at a site that we're interested in conserving that's at, 25% urbanized. But for some reason, maybe we collect data at that site and we notice that the species diversity there is much higher than we would expect compared to our baseline understanding. That would tell us that we should probably prioritize that parcel because there's something about that habitat that's really valuable. And then on the flip side of things, if we have a piece of land that we are interested in saving as habitat for wildlife, but we collect data there with a wildlife camera and the species diversity there is pretty low compared to what we would expect, that tells us that there's something about that habitat that maybe we shouldn't prioritize as much. And one thing I kind of want to wrap up discussion of this network with is just highlighting some of the amazing research that other people within the network have been able to do. And these are examples of multi-city analysis projects that have used some of the data that we've contributed to the network. So a lot of different cities contribute their data to these studies, and researchers are asking really interesting questions about, for example, how wealth and urbanization intersect to form or to influence the communities of mammals in those cities, how gentrification affects things, how climate plays into all of these things as well. And then on top of all of this, because we've been collecting data, as a part of this network, we've been able to publish some of our own research as well. So that's been really amazing for the organization too. And just to kind of wrap up, I'll just talk a little bit about, what we have our sights on in the future. So, as I've been mentioning, we want to continue using wildlife cameras to support our mission of land acquisition, really supporting funding requests and building relationships with landowners and, helping allowing the data to inform our prioritization of different potential wildlife corridors within our broader study area. We also want to continue to use wildlife cameras to inform how we steward and manage our land. So understanding, how our progress with land stewardship and habitat restoration is benefiting the wildlife that are using these areas of habitat. And then also we want to continue performing community outreach and advocating for wildlife by using the amazing images and videos that we collect from our wildlife cameras. So it's a really powerful way to engage people and to really help people connect with this idea of conservation, particularly in urban areas. And then as we continue to grow our educational programming as well, using data from these camera traps is a really valuable way of providing research opportunities for undergraduate and high school students and really helping expose young conservationists and biologists to the research that they could potentially do in the future. So that's one of the best parts of the job as well. So with that, I just want to thank everybody, and I want to thank all my coworkers on AFC's team of staff, and of course the board of directors as well, who really supports our mission of conducting urban wildlife research. And one of my supervisors, Dr. Amanda Zelmer, as well at Occidental College, and all the students and volunteers that help us. And I want to thank the Phil Simon Clinic Tanzania Project for having me